so my point is that they may not necessarily be that relevant, and maybe they should just go back to doing what they did back in the olden days, which is basically be a gun club.
I see members as being in support of that. Like they're willingly giving their money to something knowing that that's what it's going to do with the money.
Yeah, it's a little crazy, but I have to do this and accept the negative for what I believe to be a net positive.
It's just that age-old argument about tools and users and stuff like that.
That's how big of a deal this kind of thing is to me. And I can't support an organization that doesn't put like reason first.
Welcome into another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford, and we'd love it if you'd like and share this video and subscribe to the channel, because you don't want to be a loser.
Yeah, you might be like us, just a couple of losers talking on webcams, about random stuff. So I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and don't forget, we write our own music, and it's available on iTunes and Spotify, so you can stick around to the end of the show to hear a new song. Well, hopefully it's new. It's getting hard to keep track these days. And if you're feeling like it, go ahead and check out our website. That's ksmvidcast.com. You can find news and information and more, and find ways to help support the channel and stuff like that. So Casey, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I thought we would talk about firepower, guns. Well, not guns specifically, but like the NRA, maybe.
Oh, sorry. I do that every time somebody says NRA and guns.
So I take it you're kind of a fan of the NRA in general.
Well, not really, actually. I got mixed feelings. So
you've had a sticker on your car before, right?
Well, that was kind of, because that was a Geo Metro, little teeny tiny car. So that was my like version of the balls dangling from the back of the pickup truck. I do kind of support some of the things that they do, like the safety training and all that. And I'm an avid supporter of the right to possess firearms and self-defense and stuff. So that part I align with, but there's some other things that I'm kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think the camp I fall into is probably pretty similar, but I place a lot more value, I guess, on the stuff that I find objectionable, like that weighs a little bit more heavily in terms of how relevant I see them in this day and age.
Yeah. So how do you want to approach this conversation? I think we had maybe discussed about like flipping sides, maybe, or something.
Yeah. I thought it would be an interesting experiment to like walk in the other side's shoes, so to speak, because that's like a thing that you do if you're in a debate club, right? Like you sometimes have to argue for something that you don't necessarily believe in. And there's great value in that, because you might start to see some points that you hadn't really entertained before. You strengthen your argument abilities, your critical thinking, because you really have to craft a a good argument. Now, like, we're not doing this for points or winning anything.
No.
So people might think that, oh, well, you have no real like motive to make a good argument, but I mean, we don't have a motive to make a crappy one either. So I don't really see like why we would end up being lazy just to.
Well, yeah, and I mean, people who've watched the show know that we kind of like to explore a lot of different angles and are willing to discuss or entertain things that maybe we don't fully believe or comprehend. So I think, that's not outside the realm of possibility, I think. I mean, it's fairly easy, I guess, to some extent for me, like at least in a certain light, because of the way I feel about that organization. Like I said, I have mixed feelings, so I could kind of go either way in that regard. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will take the defense stance for the NRA. I will defend their existence and do my best to make a good argument for why they should still be around, what could they do for the country and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to kind of lean a little anti-NRA. Like, in a lot of this, I kind of like tried to research things because I've heard a lot of stuff randomly thrown around and didn't really hear a bunch of concrete statements. And sadly, the further I dug and the deeper I went into the rabbit hole, the more like non-concrete arguments I found. There's a lot of these counter arguments were mostly emotive, and there's a lot of fallacious reasoning and loaded language and stuff. And, it's difficult too, because I think there's this kind of conflation between the NRA as an organization and guns and gun rights and things like that. And so it gets people divided. It's like 50-50 as far as I know, as far as like the general public's opinion of that, or close to somewhere down the middle. But so I think we should try to stick to the organizational side of things and less to the philosophy about like self-defense and gun ownership and things like that. I mean, we'll probably go into that a little bit. I mean, it's inevitable when you're talking about
just
the NRA.
Concept. Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, there's really no rules, as I'm sure the viewers know. We just mostly wing it. It's very, very unscripted.
It's a very anarchistic show.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, just anything goes. Yeah.
All right. Well, then why don't we kick it off and just basically start with the idea of like, is the NRA relevant?
I kind of
today,
today. And in their current form, as the NRA stands today. Oh, and I guess I should add to this to people that don't know, the NRA has multiple branches that do different things. So there's the NRA ILA, which is, I think, what most people say is the NRA, the lobbying branch. And then, there's a foundation that does charitable stuff, and then there's the main one. And so it's kind of like a bunch of different factions within the NRA.
Even the NRA, the National Revolver Association.
Rifle. Yeah.
Well, no, there's a revolver one.
Oh, there's okay. Yeah, you're right.
Also the NRA.
Yeah, exactly.
The NRA has the NRA within the NRA.
So it's like the WWF. Oh man, yeah, it gets all confusing, and that's where I think people need to just chill out a little bit and try to just sit down and have a rational conversation and not get all emotional about things, because things aren't quite as you believe they are, I guess, or as they like you to believe. So as far as relevancy, I mean, I guess they're kind of relevant. At least the portion of the organization that does safety training and teaches, in particular, kids about gun safety and things like that. I think that's really, really valuable. Providing information and stuff like that, classes and things. That's really good, because the more you know about something, the the less power it has over you. You know, if you pick up a gun and you have no idea what a gun is, well, you're a lot more likely to shoot yourself or your buddy than if you know exactly how everything functions. So I think that side of it is good. And then there's the sporting side, which is, it's more just like shooting for fun, which obviously is pretty harmless, except maybe to the environment. When you have a range full of lead, that's kind of an issue. But I think that's a benefit. There's aspects to the NRA that I think are wildly disconnected from where they should be, and maybe where they could, like, things that could actually do good overall and that more people would agree with. And I think that's something that maybe deserves a little bit of attention, room for improvement,
Well, why don't you expound upon that, because you kind of took the stance I'm supposed to take.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Well, but I'm saying that they're my point is that they're not as relevant as diehard NRA supporters think they are. In fact, I would argue that maybe they're not that relevant because they have so many competitors. A lot of people focus on the NRA as being the only organization, but there's like dozens of other various gun organizations, Gun Owners of America, the Second Amendment Foundation, Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, what's the National Association for Gun Rights, and then just the list goes on. There's like a whole bunch of different organizations, and they're a little bit more down to earth than the NRA is. So my point is that they may not necessarily be that relevant, and maybe they should just go back to doing what they did back in the olden days, which is basically be a gun club.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you make a good point with there being other organizations, but you also made the point that people don't really know about those, and that would pose a problem if the NRA kind of like disappeared into the shadows, right? Because it's not like that automatically shines a spotlight on the competitors, because I mean, people just haven't heard of them, or like I haven't heard of it. Like all you ever see is the NRA out in the media and stuff. So
and in fact, I would say that's actually part of the problem, is that they're so powerful. They're so big. They're too big for their own good, honestly. And they're full of themselves. Like at least, okay, the people that are all at the top, like the public figures that you see, they're very arrogant and full of themselves, and I think that's something that kind of drives me nuts about them. But that's another point I'm going to get into, so it's kind of a deviation. But yeah, I mean, as far as
the whole fascia aspect, I can see how that might be a little off-putting or a little disingenuous, but I mean, they really are comprised of people that really take it seriously, like Charlton Heston and a wrinkly old bloke that did cowboy movies. Not John Wayne. Clint Eastwood.
Oh, Clint Eastwood. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah. Well, and there's like Ted Nugent in there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about people that might be doing a disservice to the average, like, normal gun owner. You got Ted Nugent, Wayne LaPierre, like, he was kind of out there, and Glenn Beck. It's like kind of a slew of kind of radical sort of people, like maybe not that radical, but at least they came across as being kind of amped, you know.
And at least it's not like Scientology where like almost the entire organization is made up of people like that. You know, high profile people, you know, their whole marketing scheme is to be like, look at all these people I admire that are into this thing, you know. With the NRA, I don't think they're necessarily like hunting and pecking for, you know, gun nuts or whatever. I think that they just kind of attract the attention of those powerful people who want to use their status to, you know, help voice something that means a lot to them, you know.
Well, yeah, sure, and they're passionate. I mean, I can give them that. They're all quite passionate about those those things, and I think that might be one of the appeals. Like if you're in the organization and you're looking for a spokesperson, you're going to find people that bring energy to the organization. You don't want somebody like, you know, Bueller, just like reading a book or something all boring and stuff. You want to have hype, even if it's negative, because, you know, that brings attention to them. But it can also be a detraction too. It can certainly cause harm because, I mean, in my view, like a lot of those spokespeople, the top level spokespeople, the ones that everybody knows about, because the NRA is composed of a bunch of average people, by and large. But then there's the media people, the ones that go out there and get all the attention, and they're pretty nutty. And except for, I have to give a shout out to Collier Noir. Like I don't know if he's still a spokesperson for NRA, but he was, and he's like a really kind of down to earth, reasoned, intellectual kind of person. It's just sort of like an everyday guy. And he's pretty cool, but you know, maybe if he's not with the organization, that might be why, because he wasn't out there enough, you know. He's just like pretty chill.
well, that's probably a good segue to talk about the difference between the members and the spokespeople. I don't know that when I see a message being carried so loudly by the spokespeople, by the organization itself, you know, lobbying special interests and things like that. When I see stuff like that, I see members as being in support of that. Like they're willingly giving their money to something, knowing that that's what it's going to do with the money. You know, it's going to basically sway opinions with cash at the highest levels and stuff. And oh wait, I'm supposed to be defending it.
Well, really I can speak to that a little bit, in a relatively neutral way, I guess. Like what you're talking about there actually is very familiar in politics, the whole lesser of two evils concept, that there's a lot of people who believe in the right to self-defense and the ability to own firearms for that purpose. And they see the NRA as being really the only way to accomplish it. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are just like, wow, Wayne LaPierre, he's crazy. Or, you know, Charlton Heston, like, wow, man, that guy's nuts. But I have to support this organization, because if I don't, then that's it. You know, there's nothing left, even though there are other organizations, but the NRA is the bigger one. So it goes back to that lesser of two evils. Like you feel like, well, yeah, it's a little crazy, but I have to do this and accept the negative for what I believe to be a net positive, I guess. And so, you know, I think it, obviously we don't have data on this, so it's difficult to quantify it, but I'm pretty certain that like there are a lot of regular people who are NRA members who are just like, basically like, I just want to have my gun rights, and this is the only way to do it, even though maybe it's not the best way, and these people don't really represent me as far as philosophy, like maybe that.
For sure. I think that's got to be the case. Now I'll jump on the defense horse like I'm supposed to. I like if you are reading a hunting magazine and you see an ad for the NRA and it's got something in there that appeals to you, like, hey, we need to preserve the Second Amendment because it's so important. Like that. I mean, that's on a fundamental level, that's pretty basic, that's pretty honest. And, I don't know that most people who are signing up for the NRA are really in it to be nefarious, I guess. Like,
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I ultimately, I don't actually think, even though I personally have a problem with lobbying, I don't think that they're doing it because they want people to be harmed, but it's just that age-old argument about tools and users and stuff like that. And
when you have an organization that gets that big, this is it's actually a perfect transition into one of the things that I have a beef with is the politicization or politicization. How do you say that? Maybe I better have some more beer. So the injection of politics into this issue, and it's hard. It's like, it's not light. Like the NRA overall has become a very right-leaning, and I guess in that particular vein of right-leaning that's very political, and everything is all about politics with this organization now. It's no longer about logic and reason and having discussions and stuff. It's just all about politics. And you have this organization that gets so huge and has so much money, and everything becomes, it's basically an engine to generate revenue that gets dumped into Washington, D.C. For political purposes. And I think that does a lot of harm to everybody. I think it does harm to gun owners. It does harm to the organization itself. And certainly, and add to that, like all the wackadoodle people up at the top that everybody talks about, it gives the average person that's just like, hey, I want to be able to defend myself. It gives us a bad name. And it makes me not want to support that organization because I feel like I'm a principled person and I put my money where my mouth is. I mean, hell, I'm so against the TSA. I didn't go to my dad's second wedding after my mom died and my dad got remarried. I didn't go to his wedding because it meant I had to fly. And on principle, I don't fly because the TSA exists, and so that's how big of a deal this kind of thing is to me. And I can't support an organization that doesn't put like reason first and getting along with people first, and conversation but all I see, especially from the ILA side of things, is like combativeness and stuff. And that just, if you're on the other side of that, if you're somebody who maybe is on the fence or you're an anti-gun person, all that does is push you further away. And certainly if you're an anti-gun person, it just reinforces what you believe. If there were just like regular guys like Cully and Noir like up there talking, you'd be like, oh yeah, that guy makes a lot of sense. He's not crazy. And he just likes guns.
I think we've learned on this show that people don't always listen to reason. Sometimes they need the flair. Sometimes they need all the pizzazz and the animated, spokesperson. But here's the thing, though: like the NRA spends like $250,000 a year, and $3 million of that is on lobbying, which is kind of a small chunk. Now, there's like an indeterminate amount that they spend on PACs and stuff like that, like political activist centers or whatever they call those,
something like
coalitions. I don't starts with a C, cunnilingus.
Oh, we're demonetized.
Very scientific word.
Yeah, well, that's true. Penis, 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 penis.
So like, yeah, I mean, the politics are there, but you got to remember, like, you can't really get around playing the politics game when you're dealing with issues like a constitutional amendment as being like one of the core things that you exist to, let's say, raise knowledge about and you know, move the people toward defending it,
yeah,
or protecting it, or whatever.
Sure, exactly. I think personally, I think that's a laudable goal. Like that should be the goal, but I think that they're going about it all wrong. All the stage show kind of stuff and all this emotion and everything. Like, I mean, that maybe that's good to get certain people to pay attention to what you're saying, but you have to have something to say once they pay attention. You can't just end it at that. Like, from my cold dead hands, you can't just do that and, oh yeah, that's the end of my entire statement. No, you have to follow it up with like some kind of reasonable argument. And that's a big problem that I think exists in that organization. And maybe it's a scale thing, because some of the smaller organizations are a lot less weird like that. They focus on civil rights and just simply preserving the right to own firearms. Like, that's it. Like, there's a lot less politics, at least from some of them.
Yeah.
Obviously, in any situation when you have a hotly divisive topic like that, you're going to get people that are pretty wild. And that's not just the pro-gun side, but the anti-gun side. There's a lot of wild people all over the place.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like, a good chunk of their spending goes towards really helpful stuff like gun ranges and, I mean, apart from your environmental point, like, well, education and safety and awareness about guns and things like that. I mean, like, the NRA was kind of instrumental in making that even like a public awareness thing. Like, hey, these are dangerous tools. You should know what you're doing with them.
Yeah, I'll give you that. That's important. I mean, especially if, from the standpoint of somebody, if you don't like guns or you think they're dangerous or people shouldn't have them, I think it's better at least to inform people about the hazards and provide them with the tools necessary to safely handle these things. And maybe reinforce the idea that it's a defensive tool and not an offensive tool, like at all steps from day one, from a little kid. Like, this is not something that's a toy. This is, it's not a joke. This is a serious tool, and here's how you use it, and it's for defense only. You never aggress against somebody else. And I think that would be a really valuable thing. And they, yeah, I'll give you that. They do, at least there's a good chunk of the organization that does that.
Yeah. And for, I mean, you make a good point, but for all the flash and all the show and all the screaming that the NRA seems to be doing, that's really all they're trying to get at is, like, the Second Amendment says defense, right? Like, it's all about defense.
Oh, well, yeah. And especially if you read some of the the documents revolving around the origin of this country, it's very clear that that's what it's for. It's not for, like, 1920s rum runners to have Tommy guns and use them with impunity. No, it's actually the guy that's defending themselves against that very thing, or tyranny, or something else, or foreign invaders, or whatever.
Yeah,
that's very true.
Now, like, this might be a good time to kind of transition into some of the changes over time, because the NRA hasn't always been so gung-ho. Like, you know, it might be good maybe for the, you know, a little PR adjustment for them to kind of go back to the time when, you know, Kennedy was assassinated, and the NRA chairman or president or whatever came out and supported the ban of that particular gun that was used. And it was all like emotional, but not like an appeal to emotion. It was like, I don't see how anyone could not support banning the weapon that took away our president, you know, like, and that was probably the last time that they were really on that side of the fence. But I mean, without the NRA, we never would have had concealed weapon permits, you know, waiting periods and things like those all came from, like, directly from the NRA, where they were like penned by the people that were running the NRA. So.
Well, you're right. I do believe there were some later times when and the NRA even was after the what was the Nevada shooting, I think. They were actually even
casino or whatever.
The guy with the bump stocks,
yeah,
and you know, shot from a hotel room.
Yep.
They actually came out in support of some kind of restriction on such devices. Yeah, I got my own feelings about that because I think they're actually kind of gimmicks. But you know, whatever. But they occasionally do things, and you know, that's true. Sorry, my cat's like freaking out downstairs. I don't know what he's doing, so let's hope he's not getting into trouble. A little distracted there. So wait, let's rewind. What was your point there?
Well,
You made
a
point that I was
kind of changes over time. Like, you know, the NRA has been in support of things like gun control. You know, like what we refer to today as common sense gun control, right? So, like, I do get that the NRA is there to make sure that none of these so-called common sense gun control measures restrict your ability to have access to a firearm. But you know, it's not without precedent is basically what I'm trying to say. That if there were a truly common sense, like, middle ground kind of compromised proposal, I'm sure that they would probably be on board with it.
Well, okay, yeah, you're right. Maybe they're like overarching focus is to keep those common sense things from getting a little too uncommon. You know, going too far, I guess. Because yeah, overall the NRA, like, as an organization, has been very much in support of things like background checks and waiting periods and, you know, certain restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have responsibilities with rights, you know.
Well, sure. I mean, I think, like, ultimately it falls to the individual, but you know, in a political, legal sense, like, yeah, they certainly have been open to supporting certain things. So I suppose, you know, in that vein, well, yeah. Okay, yeah. Sorry, my cat's still freaking out back there.
I mean, I'm all for defending the Second Amendment, but correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I don't think it's really even possible. Like, it's nigh impossible to repeal something that was on the Bill of Rights. Like, those 10 amendments are basically like
the core,
written in stone, effectively.
Yeah, like the 10 Commandments. Yeah,
even as ridiculous as the third one is, like,
well, maybe
if you took it away, then I suppose it would be a real inconvenience if a soldier walked in and took your bed. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It could be relevant at some point, and it certainly was at the time. And I know there was a lot of conversation in the early days about enumerating things in the Bill of Rights that it would be perceived that, oh, these are the rights everybody has and nothing else. So yeah, that I'm still, my cat is like totally, it's going nuts down there. I don't know what he's getting into, but that'll be an adventure.
A good time to mention that we have a Floyd shirt available for sale on ksmvidcast.com.
Yep, I should have titled it "The Troublemaker." Oh yeah, yeah. I think some of the core things in the Bill of Rights would be very difficult to change. Now, you don't necessarily have to repeal an amendment to completely nullify it through legal precedent and a whole slew of regulations and hoops and expenses and stuff like that. And it's like, people probably don't know that machine guns are technically illegal-ish, but aside from certain people in certain states like ours, you can get one. You just have to pay a fee and fill out a bunch of paperwork and go through a bunch of rigmarole, and you can have one. And they're ridiculously expensive thanks to the 1986 Firearms Owners Protection Act that limited the purchase by the public of any select fire or fully automatic firearm to anything 1986 and before. So there's that. Yeah. Do you have any other points?
Well, just that I think this is something both sides are guilty of, and I think you touched on this a bit, but there's always emotion. Like that's all that people ever seem to argue with is emotion. It's like, oh, so and so or this many people just got killed by a gunman with such and such type of gun, and they use that to kind of fly in the face of the NRA and say, like, look at these organizations supporting this thing that made this thing happen. And even to some extent, like the whole banning of the gun that was used to kill the president, like, that was very tragic, that was very terrible, but it could have been any gun.
Yeah. And how many presidents have been assassinated with a rifle? As far as I know, up until that point, just that one.
What was Lincoln shot with?
I think it was a small pistol, like a Derringer or whatever. Like, well, I don't know if this is like black powder days, so I don't, a small pistol. But that's the thing. It's like, if you look at the things from a global perspective, like how many, what is it, Carcano rifles, I think it was. Oh, there's another name in there, but whatever. How many of those rifles are used for target practice, hunting, defending your farm from wolves and
feral hogs?
Yeah, exactly. Feral hogs, yeah. And random stuff, or cattle rustlers or something like that. I mean, probably countless times. And this one time somebody uses this one particular rifle, like, which is no different than any other. And I love the comparisons between, people are like, oh, the AR-15, it's so deadly. And then you show somebody, ask people, show them the Ruger Mini 14, which has a wooden stock, and then show them the AR-15 and say, oh, which is more deadly? And everybody points to the AR-15 because it's all like polymer and, aluminum and stuff like that. And it's all black, dangerous looking, but it fires the same cartridge. It's the same gun. It's just the other one looks like a hunting rifle. And that's the whole point, is it does come down to emotion. And researching this, I was like genuinely looking for real arguments about the negative side of the NRA. Like, what's bad about the NRA? What's bad about it? Like, find some like dirt. Like, have they done some shady things, or is there like a murder mystery behind the scenes or something like? And I found none of that. It was all massively emotional arguments, like, and not only just playing to emotion, but just inflating things and just taking things to the nth degree, like, throwing in all this loaded language. I'm just like, if you want to convince me, use logic, and if you can't do that, you've got nothing. And so it's like it's really hard. And then and of course I could see a lot of the arguments where people were clearly not in favor of private gun ownership, and I'll give them that. Like, okay, there's people that don't like that, and that's a legitimate argument. That's your own opinion that you don't like that. But to throw in like all these crazy scenarios and try to like label people and ad hominems flinging all over the place, it's just it's just like what the NRA does. It does a disservice to your cause. That's it's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, they're definitely both like, they both kind of don't make a lot of sense. Every now and then you'll get a good point. Like, I mean, the NRA basically does just target every little bit of gun legislation, like even background checks, like no matter what it is, they think, oh, if you want to ban like a part of a trigger or something, like that's taking your guns away and stuff. But that's a little extreme, but
now of course
we're doing a terrible job of defending other sides of
well, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of the stuff that we could come up with. I did want to bring up that whole point, like, talking about the Second Amendment, that the term shall not be infringed seems to me to be pretty clear. So if they're technically defending the Second Amendment and there is a piece of legislation that infringes on ownership of arms, remember, it's not just firearms, it says arms. Right.
I'd be more mad about like illegal knives and stuff, because like, I mean, no matter what, you can always get a gun of some sort. You're not infringing that right ever.
Well, but it's not a matter like, it's not a matter
like,
of
well, what's your definition of infringe? Because to me that sounds like a full stop.
Well, okay, think about it this way. Let's, because I think we're going into, like, I think almost our very first episode, talking about guns and stuff like that. Imagine if let's say guns are food. It's food. It's not firearms. It's all manner of food. And there's all kinds of legislation passed where they're like, we're banning cheeseburgers, we're banning pizzas, we're banning this, we're banning that, and what's left is salads. And you're like, well, we're not infringing on your right to eat. You can still buy a salad and you can eat some nuts. Technically, there's still food, so we're not infringing. And I kind of see that as, because it's indefinite. Like, there's no dividing line between where infringement begins and where it ends. So to some people, any changes, like any reduction of capability, is infringement. And maybe that's a bit extreme. I would argue that, I guess, if
analogies are always hard to use because you can always pick them apart. Like, they're never apples to apples.
No, but why? The question is why. Like, why is it that I can't have this thing, but I can have that thing? And at what point does it end? Am I going to be left with nothing but like a little tiny 22 pistol and somebody saying, well, you still have a gun? I can't defend myself with that.
Well, if you can't defend yourself with it, is it even a gun?
Well, no. And I would say, actually, my thought on that, I mean,
it shouldn't be touted as a defensive tool if something that is technically a gun cannot be used whatsoever in your defense.
No, here's the thing. You can point to a few outlying cases where somebody one shot killed somebody with a 22. So that could be argued like, well, a 22 is potentially lethal, so it's good enough. And okay, well, what about somebody who's not trained? What about somebody who's, weak or elderly or something like that, and they're trying to defend themselves against a home invasion with like 6 people, and you're going to give them a single shot 22?
I mean, you can't really like try to draw off of the worst case contingencies, like, oh, like our founding fathers probably envisioned 200,000 ninjas descending on one home. We need like an Abrams tank in our living room.
Well,
I don't think it needs to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be extreme.
It doesn't have to be, but there should be some sort of definition, like a predefined definition, which there isn't.
Well, that's why we need to update the Constitution and not just sit around and try to parse out what they meant, 400 years ago or whenever.
Well, yeah, and
started getting drafted.
I think understanding like the rationale behind it is a first step. Understanding the purpose, like what is the goal of this? Like if you're talking about personal firearms ownership, what's the goal of owning firearms and things like that? That's a really important.
I mean, that's changed too. Like the original intent of the Second Amendment is basically nullified by the changing times. Like no amount of guns in our hands as the people is anywhere near capable of outgunning the government if they should become tyrannical.
Well, no, we totally are, actually. I would say if you can look to historical events to point out that that's technically possible.
I mean, well,
will it actually?
Not just based on guns, though. Like that requires tactical maneuvers and coordination and things that, like, again, because of technology, we're completely flaccid. We're incapable of doing that against the government.
And one of the things I think too is there's 2 parts to the Second Amendment, and one of those is the militia. And the original idea behind that is that there wasn't a standing army, but everybody was the army. So if everybody was part of the army, the military of sorts in the day, it would be very hard to invade because everybody's armed, and they would train and do things, and you saw it as your civic duty to be part of the self-defense of your country people.
Yeah.
And that's changed too. And maybe some would argue that's not for the better. I would too, because I think it's turned our military forces from a localized force to an outward facing one, where now we're the world's policemen.
Yeah, we're not protective per se. Like that's a small arm of what they do. It's all about oppression and power, but
that's perpetuating the petrodollar. Yeah,
that's been the case since the first couple decades of this country. Like the Federalists wanted the standing army, the Democratic Republicans did not, and they lost, and the Federalists won, and we got a standing army, like almost in our infancy.
And maybe that's something that should be changed too.
Yeah, it should have changed right there.
But you're talking about like altering foundational documents, and maybe we should be like, hey, we learn some things. I mean, that is the proper scientific way. This whole entire country was founded on the idea it was a grand experiment, right?
Yeah.
So we're testing things. We have data now. Let's use that data to alter the way things work. And to me, I think the military thing is a big problem. Not to shit on any member of the military forces, because I think they
like we argued here, the members and the people that comprise the upper echelon are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the NRA, same with the military. The soldiers are relatively innocent in the machinations of the military itself.
Well, yeah. I mean, does the president pick up a rifle and hop on a military transport plane and fly over and lead the charge? Hell no.
Yeah. But I mean, like the whole foundational document thing means jack shit to me, because that's an appeal to tradition. That's a logical fallacy. Like, it doesn't matter if that's what we were built on. If you're not like, well, that would be like me being like, well, I really love this log cabin that's built on this, like twig that's eroded over 80 years or whatever. I'm not going to change the foundation because that's the original,
Well, you're right. And that's the thing, like the idea that people in the past knew more about how to run things or do a particular thing than we do today is kind of ridiculous. Not that we know it that much more, but you can look at stuff that's happened in the past. We have a thing called history. And so you can analyze the data and make better determinations based on that data. And so, yeah, the idea that, oh, well, these people were the grand Illuminati and they knew more than everybody. They were the wisest people on the planet. Well, there's wise people today. So things might need to change, but it's really important, I think, to figure out what the actual goal is and come up with like a very succinct framework for that, and then build everything around that, which you can't do that in politics. Like it doesn't work like that. It's all about like keeping the machine running and feeding the beast.
If I were the president of the NRA and I had so much political sway that I could talk the entire government into being like, you know what, all right, let's rewrite our constitution. Other countries do it all the time. So
well, we do it occasionally.
I mean, no,
like not a rewrite, but
we do revisions, like like edition 3, but it's not like we didn't like reboot it.
An overhaul,
like if it were up to me, I would say rights need to be explained a little better. They need to outline your responsibilities, and they need to outline retribution for going, like, stepping out of bounds, so it's like then you at least have clear cut, like, here's your rights, here's what you have to do to maintain and protect those rights, and then here's what happens if you abuse those rights. They go away for you. You don't have to take away that tool from everybody, but you should include in the responsibilities what needs to be put in place to prevent those people from abusing the right,
consequences for things.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that maybe the important thing is to come up with a set of foundational principles, because right now we have foundational rules, and that's very different. So we should be explicitly stating what is hoped to be accomplished, and that should never change. Like, there's certain things I think everybody can agree on, like preservation of life and things like that. Those things never change. Like, you'd never want to live in a world where that wasn't part of the equation. And so come up with those ideas, and the stuff that revolves around it changes with the time, but you always kind of adhere to those core principles. And everything kind of has to pass the test of, does it adhere to those principles? So if you want to make a change, sure. But if it violates one of those core principles that is pretty much universally agreed upon, then you have to make a very compelling argument. That would be my thought on that. No, like emergency declaration, and you could just do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah. But I think it needs. This probably won't make sense, but I think it needs more general language that's very specific, and by that I mean, instead of a right to bear arms, it should be a right to defend yourself.
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
just generally, like they, there's nothing saying that you can't learn martial arts. There's nothing saying that you can't buy a knife or a gun or whatever. But when you construct the responsibility portion, that's where you've got to put in like all the caveats and all the, the nitty gritty stuff, because if you don't attach responsibility to rights, they're nothing more than entitlements. They're just like, oh, I can do whatever I want because this is a right that was given to me, and I don't have to do anything to earn it.
Well, yeah, and entitlements can be taken away, and I think, yeah, that's one of the problems I have with the Bill of Rights is it's so explicit and all about like very particular details as opposed to concepts. Like it would have been better for somebody to illuminate people with their philosophy as to why these things are important, and like leave it at that and say, you know what, you can figure it out after the fact, but these are the things we believe are really important.
Yeah, the Third Amendment could have actually probably should have been no one that doesn't live in your home can come in and do whatever.
Well, and that actually, it's very simple. Self-ownership. So from self-ownership, you derive property rights.
I mean, like that would even protect you from no-knock warrants and stuff like that.
Well, and that goes into the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, even like those things. You don't even have to have so many things. You just say, like, you keep it concise. Mm-hmm. And my thought is, any something I think would be like really valuable, but probably would never happen. But maybe I have this thing I call the 10-year-old test, that any piece of legislation or whatever should have to go through various schoolyards and classrooms of 10-year-olds. And if they can comprehend it, and if they can explain what it's about, then it makes sense. If they can't, you got to go back to the drawing board, start over, because, you can't expect the whole like concept of like, what is it?
Well, in marketing, you're supposed to write at an 8th grade level, not because most people have nothing further than an 8th grade education, but because most people get up through 12th grade, but some of that tends to fall off. And the stuff that's most likely been ingrained, like most permanently, kind of caps out at that 8th grade level.
Yeah.
So your awareness kind of stops there, at least in a casual sense,
Sure. And what I was going to say was that like ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, today it is. Because even lawyers and judges can't comprehend any of this legislation. Like, it's so complicated. And that's a huge problem, because here's the thing, like, if the language is so convoluted that it can be twisted to suit whatever party wants to twist it, then it's useless. And if there's exceptions, like, oh yeah, well, the people at the top could just do whatever the hell they want, but the average person has to adhere to this, well, it's useless too.
Yeah.
It should apply to everybody, and it should be very simple and easy to understand. And if it's not, well, it's bogus. That's kind of my point there. And that's what I do like about the Constitution, is how simple it is. They didn't have 50 pages per amendment. They had just like a tiny paragraph with a couple sentences, which might be,
that's too simple though.
It might be a little too simple. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe a little context would be helpful. But I think that
the very fact that you need to have constitutional experts, and the fact that you can find 2 constitutional experts that will have completely diametrically opposed opinions about what the Constitution is saying should tell you enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like look at the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, like all these different things.
If there's that much wiggle room in interpretation, it wasn't written well.
Well, and that is a big problem too, is the fact that the Constitution was written hundreds of years ago. And language has changed, yet we haven't changed the language of the Constitution to fit current times. Or we haven't figured out a way to make it like mathematically algorithmic so that it doesn't involve language, and it involves concepts or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the language hasn't necessarily changed. Like the dialect is a little peculiar, but
the meaning of words, though, that's the thing.
Well, like what though?
Well, I mean, Second Amendment, militia is one of them. There's people that have completely different views about what that means. And the whole like Congress can make no law. What is it? So, God, I'm terrible. I don't
on the First Amendment.
Yeah, the First Amendment. Yeah.
Congress shall make no law. Yeah, now I'm trying to blank.
Oh, geez, too much beer. Well, I'm sure it'll be in the comments, but the point is, there are things that change as far as like how people perceive it, and certain words have slightly different meanings.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Does it mean respect as in providing support, or does it mean respect as in relating to?
Well, relating to, because
that's what you say, but I've heard things to the contrary.
Well, it's in the phrasing though. Like if it said like Congress shall, respect religion, that means one form of respect. But when it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that means no law that's related to religion, no law that applies to religion, no law that has anything to do with how a religion does a religion thing.
Well, and I agree, but let's take the term arms. So why is it that as a private citizen, I can't buy an Abrams tank? I could barely buy a rocket launcher, a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher. And, if I want to buy a machine gun, I can only get one from 1986 and before. Yet the military has them, the police have them.
No, that's a very good point, because when they say arms, yeah, you should be able to buy a tank, but they shouldn't have said arms. They should have said defend.
Well,
and they should have outlined like what makes sense for a person versus an organization versus a military. Like there are things that just don't make sense for people. Like people don't need a tank, like ever. You can't really justify a person.
You don't need it, but you don't need sports cars. Maybe it's just fun. You don't intend to kill anybody, but it would be fun to drive. Well, who wouldn't want to drive a tank? Like that's awesome.
You shouldn't really necessarily have a right to have fun. Like that just doesn't make sense.
Wait a minute, what? So you're talking we should all eat like flavorless health pucks? Like fun is what it's all about.
Why does it have to be all or none though? Like I'm just saying, you don't necessarily have to have things that you just want. Like,
well,
but that shouldn't be like a protected thing. Like you are guaranteed the right to have whatever you want is not a right. That's pure and utter like what do they call that? Privilege.
Well, but who says? And where is the line there? Like where do needs and wants collide? And why not? Is art null and void at that point? Like I can't paint because I want to do it, but I don't need to do it. But it's my way of expressing.
Well, again, you're just taking it all for nothing, all or nothing. Like it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's not like it's not like saying you don't have to have a right to do what you want. Doesn't mean you can't do what you want.
Well, I'm saying who decides that? That's the biggest.
Who decides anything? Like
exactly.
I mean, that's like how long is a piece of string? It's a pointless question.
No,
it's absolutely pointless. Like you don't need to worry about who decides what. It's like the people come together and decide what makes sense.
But what people?
Not the people. Like all of us democratically. Ooh. Like if you don't agree with it, you're an outlier. Big deal. Tough shit. Deal with it. That's life.
That's exactly how the Jim Crow laws came into existence. Like there has to be some space for analysis. And I think things need to be more conceptual than they are like hard-lined rules that are, set in stone. And black and white and stuff like that. I think this is actually, we're coming up on an hour of conversation here. I think this is actually a good conversation, which I think might need to be its own episode, honestly, because this is actually really good. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we kind of ditched the NRA thing, so maybe this is kind of like a twofer.
Yeah. Well, this is, we do that from time to time. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we
I mean, it's related. I think it is related to certain people.
Like, yeah, this is kind of a common theme, and we should definitely go into like the Constitution. We talk about it a lot, but like, and the whole idea of rights and privileges and stuff like that, like, it's fuzzy,
Well, that's very true. Yeah.
It's like, you can make arguments for rights being just a human thing. The actual definition of rights is something that's bestowed upon you from a government, like,
yeah,
and
or by Webster's dictionary or something.
Yeah, and it's like, well, when you ask who gets to pick, it's like, well, whoever's doing the picking, whoever is allowed to do the picking, if you don't like what they're doing, you remove them from whatever power that they have. There's always a contingency, right?
Well, and maybe we should actually talk about anarchism one of these days.
Well, now if you're asking how, like, well, by the very means that you say we have the power to overtake the government, but good luck trying.
Well, and going back to anarchism, I don't believe you necessarily have to overtake the government to nullify it. But that's a conversation for another day. So I think that's just about all the time we have for today. That's probably a good point to kind of wrap things up. I'm sure this is gonna, oh man, I mean, we could probably go on for like 6 hours about this particular one.
Yeah.
And to think it all started with like an NRA challenge, like, nice.
We kind of failed miserably at taking opposing viewpoints on that, but
well, there were some.
Yeah. We tried, but it was a little muddled. So
well, and it's hard because I think this is something that, like, in some respects we don't completely disagree on, and can see like points from other points of view. So I would like to actually have a conversation where we totally disagree on something.
So I Googled First Amendment rights, and I see one of Trump's tweets came up.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
He said, Twitter is completely stifling free speech, and I, as president, will not allow it to happen. Does he not realize that Twitter is a private organization that doesn't have to supply the First Amendment rights to anybody?
The very first word is Congress. So, oh man. I mean, the concept extends to private organizations. Like, if you want to stay in business, you might probably want to let people talk freely, but you don't have to.
Well, even the First Amendment doesn't allow for certain types of speech. It's like I was saying, responsibilities do come with rights, and you can't. Well, can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
But that isn't free speech. That's a call to action. That's different. There are certain exceptions, and the exceptions have exceptional circumstances. It's not just speaking your opinion. You're not saying, oh, I believe there is a fire going on over there. No, you're screaming fire in a crowded theater. That is totally different. That's not free speech. That's a call to action.
It's speech.
No, we'll have to get into that.
Did the definition of speech change?
It's very complex. Like like I said, we're gonna have to like go into this. We're gonna have to deep sink dive into this one. But I think we have a kind of a lot of fuel for conversation right now.
Yeah,
actually. So
hopefully, there's a lot of comments.
Oh yeah. Well, and as usual, one episode turns into like 3 more ideas. So
yeah.
And we thought we were going to run out of ideas before we ran out of songs. Oh man. Oh, those halcyon days.
All right. Well, if you've got some ideas on the NRA or the Constitution or any of the other stuff that we digressed upon, go ahead and leave them in the comments. Check out ksmvidcast.com because there's all kinds of cool shit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and thanks for deep sink diving with us. I mean, originally into the NRA, but now into like everything, you know? And we'll definitely revisit this one as we do with many deep topics. So yeah. All right, everybody, and hope everybody's staying safe in these weird, crazy times. Take care, and have a good night.
Really down.